Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the muddy candlelit world of medieval Europe, where sleep wasn't a cozy retreat, but a gritty bug-filled battle against the cold and dark. Picture this, you're sprawled on a lumpy straw mat, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and last week's stew. Somewhere nearby, a goat snorts, and a flea decides your armpit is prime real estate. The sun's barely up, but the church bell's already clanging like it's personally offended by your existence. You probably won't survive this with all your modern need for 8 hours, and the memory foam pillow intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, or rather, you're jolted awake by a rooster that sounds like it's auditioning for a death metal band. Your bed is a sack of straw on a dirt floor, and it's not exactly a 5-star experience. The straw's half-rotted, poking you like tiny medieval pitchforks, and it's teeming with fleas that treat your skin like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You itch before you're even conscious. The air in your one-room hut is a fragrant mix of smoke sweat and something suspiciously like the goat tethered in the corner. This isn't a bedroom. It's a survival pod where you, your family, and an alarming number of critters coexist. Privacy, never heard of it. Your entire household parents, siblings, maybe a random cousin who smells like turnips, sprawls across the same cramped space. Everyone tangled in scratchy wool blankets that haven't been washed since the last harvest. You roll off your mat and the floor's a cold, muddy slap against your bare feet. If it rained last night, which it probably did, because medieval roofs were about as waterproof as a sieve, the dirt's turned into a squelching swamp. You're already dreaming of your modern mattress, but here, you're lucky if your bedding doesn't actively scuttle away. A mainstream historical fact: most medieval peasants slept on straw or rush-filled mattresses often shared with multiple family members, as houses typically had one room for all activities, cooking, eating, and sleeping included. Your blanket's heavy with grime, practically a second skin, and it smells like it's been on a pilgrimage of its own. You'd love a shower, but bathing's a luxury, and the nearest river's frozen, or smells like the village's communal latrine. A quirky tidbit some peasants believed: sleeping on straw blessed by a priest could ward off evil spirits, so they'd beg for a sprinkle of holy water on their bedding, hoping it'd keep demons at bay. Didn't do much for the fleas though. You grope for your tunic, which is basically a sack with sleeves, and pull it on, wincing as it scratches your already irritated skin. The hut's walls are wattle and daub sticks and mud with a side of animal dung for that extra charm. And they're doing a terrible job keeping out the morning chill. You can see your breath, a little cloud of proof you're still alive, which is honestly a win. In 14th century Europe, you stumble toward the hearth, where last night's fire is a sad pile of ash. Restarting, it's a whole ordeal. Flint steel and a prayer to whatever saint handles sparks. The smoke stings your eyes, but at least it's warm, kind of. You're already dreading the day's work, hauling water, grinding grain, or dodging the Lord's overseer, who thinks shouting is a personality trait. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants slept worse in winter due to cold or in summer due to bugs, but either way, your morning's off to a rough start. You're not just waking up, you're launching into a daily fight for survival. No coffee, no snooze button, just you, a crusty loaf of bread, and a world that's already plotting to make your day miserable. The worst part, this is just the beginning. Your hut's not just a home. It's a chaotic ecosystem where humans, animals, and insects are locked in a weird, smelly truce. You're not alone in this mess. Your family's right there, snoring, scratching, or arguing over who gets the least damp corner of the mat. And that goat, it's eyeing you like you owe it rent. You're tempted to crawl back into bed, but the straw's already poking new holes in your patience, and the day's chores won't wait. You're not living the dream, you're living the medieval reality, where sleep is less about rest and more about surviving until the sun comes up again. Let's see how you handle the rest of this day, assuming you don't trip over a chicken first. You're still rubbing sleep from your eyes, the stain of last night's hearth smoke, lingering like an unwelcome guest, when you realize your medieval morning's about to get even less cozy. You're not just sharing your straw mat with fleas. You're sharing your entire hut with a small army of family members, neighbors, and livestock all crammed into one smoky, creaking room. This isn't a private bedroom. It's a communal survival bunker where personal space is as mythical as a dragon. You try to stretch, but your elbow grazes your snoring brother, and your foot narrowly misses a chicken that's decided the corner is its throne. The air's thick with the scent of unwashed wool, damp straw, and the unmistakable whiff of the goat you met earlier, who's now chewing something that looks suspiciously like your spare tunic. In medieval Europe, communal sleeping was the norm, not the exception. A mainstream historical fact, most peasant households lived in single-room dwellings often no larger than a modern garage, where entire families, sometimes 10 or more people, slept together for warmth and safety. You're tangled in a pile of bodies, everyone wrapped in scratchy blankets trying to steal a bit of heat from each other. It's less cozy family cuddle, and more human Tetris with a side of body odor. Your parents are wedged near the hearth, hogging what little warmth it spits out, while your younger siblings are squished in the middle, their tiny elbows jabbing like medieval acupuncture. If you're lucky, you're not on the outer edge where the cold seeps through the mud walls like an icy handshake. You glance around, hoping for a quiet corner to gather your thoughts. But privacy's a joke here. Your neighbor Agnes, who showed up last night because her roof leaked again, is muttering in her sleep about turnips. The goat's still eyeing you, probably plotting revenge for that time you shoot it off your mat. And then there's the pig, yes, a pig, snuffling near the door. Its warmth a welcome trade-off for the fact that it keeps rolling into your legs. Animals indoors weren't just quirky. They were strategic. A quirky tidbit, peasants often slept with livestock like cows or goats because their body heat was a precious resource, sometimes making the difference between a chilly night and frostbite. You're basically spooning a farmyard, and it's as glamorous as it sounds. The noise is relentless. Someone snoring like they're sawing logs, the wind's whistling through gaps in the walls, and the chickens are having some kind of pre-dawn debate. You'd kill for noise-canceling headphones, but the closest thing here is stuffing straw in your ears, which honestly you're considering. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping fostered stronger family bonds or just made everyone crankier, but right now you're leaning toward the latter. You try to stand, but your foot lands in something squishy. Is it mud pig, droppings of forgotten turnip? You don't investigate. You just wipe it on the straw and move on, because in this world, hygiene's more of a suggestion than a rule. You shuffle toward the hearth, stepping over your cousin who's sprawled like he's auditioning for a medieval crime scene. The fire's down to embers and the room's so cold, you can see your breath, a little puff of proof you're still kicking. You're tempted to nudge your sister awake to take over fire duty, but she's curled up with the family dog who's growling softly like he knows you're plotting. Everyone's got a role in this chaotic sleep setup. Someone's always tending the fire, checking for drafts, or shooing animals back to their corners. It's less a household and more a survival co-op, where everyone's too tired to argue but too stubborn to die. You wrap your cloak tighter, itching already from the wool that's more lice than fabric. You'd love a moment alone. But solitude's not on the menu. The communal setup isn't just about warmth, it's about safety. A lone sleeper in a separate room was a target for thieves' wolves. Or worse, medieval ghost stories weren't exactly comforting bedtime tales. So you're stuck here, surrounded by snores, smells, and the occasional clock, wondering how anyone gets any rest. Spoiler, they don't not really. You're not sleeping. You're enduring caught in a nightly wrestling match with cold bugs and your uncle's elbow. And yet somehow, these people kept going night after night, proving that medieval resilience was less about comfort and more about sheer stubborn survival. You're already exhausted and the day's barely begun. You're still tangled in the medieval sleep pile. The goat's judgmental stare, burning into you as you try to extract yourself from the human and animal lasagna that passes for a bed. You finally managed to stand shaking off straw that somehow worked its way into places straw has no business being. Your so-called mattress is less a bed and more a crunchy living ecosystem teeming with fleas and probably a few ambitious mice. It's not just uncomfortable, it's a full-on betrayal of everything you thought sleep should be. You're itching already and the day's first light is barely creeping through the gaps in your hut's wattle and daub walls, which, let's be honest, are more suggestion than structure. You're dreaming of your modern memory foam, but here, your bed's a sack stuffed with straw hay. Or maybe some old rushes if you're feeling fancy. It's about as cozy as sleeping on a pile of mildly annoyed hedgehogs. A mainstream historical fact, medieval peasant beds were typically simple wooden frames, if they had frames at all, filled with straw hay or rushes, which were replaced a few times a year to keep them from turning into moldy health hazards. These weren't mattresses in any modern sense, just sacks of organic matter that flattened under your weight and invited every bug in the village to move in. You toss and turn and the straw shifts, poking you like it's got a personal grudge. Your blanket's no better a heavy wool thing, caked with grime, smelling like it's been dragged through a barnyard. It's less about keeping you warm and more about reminding you that hygiene's a distant dream. You're wrapped in it now, scratching your arm, and wondering if the fleas are throwing a party or just unionizing. The air's cold, your feet are bare, and the dirt floor's a chilly, muddy mess that clings to your toes like a clingy ex. You glance at your bed and notice it's not just you sleeping on it. Your siblings, a stray dog, and possibly that goat are all claiming their share. A quirky tidbit, some medieval households stuffed their mattresses with herbs like lavender or rosemary, hoping the scent would mask the stench of damp straw and keep pests at bay. Spoiler, it didn't work. The fleas loved lavender as much as they loved you, and the herbs just added a fancy note to the overall aroma of despair. You're tempted to kick the straw pile in frustration, but that'd probably just launch a cloud of bugs into your face. You shuffle toward the hearth where the fire's down to a few sad embers, and you're already dreading the nightly ritual of keeping it alive. Sleeping on straw wasn't just about discomfort, it was about survival. That thin layer of plant matter was your only defense against the frozen earth beneath. Without it, the cold would seep up through the dirt, turning your bones to ice before dawn. Historians still argue whether these crude beds were worse in winter, when they were your only shield against frost, or in summer, when they became a breeding ground for every insect within a 10-mile radius. Right now, you're betting on winter because the chill's already making your toes curl, like they're auditioning for a claw machine. You try to adjust your blanket, but it's so heavy with dirt, it might as well be armor. The straw's flattened into a sad pancake from weeks of use, and you're pretty sure something just scurried across your foot. You'd love to change the bedding, but that's a major production, hauling fresh straw from the barn, assuming you've got any left after the last harvest, and convincing your family to help without starting a fight over who's the laziest. The bed's not just a place to sleep. It's a battleground where you fight cold bugs and your own exhaustion. You're already fantasizing about a hot shower, but the best you've got is a bucket of river water that's probably hosting its own ecosystem. The worst part, this straw and flea nightmare is universal. Even the slightly better off peasants, the ones with an extra pig or two, aren't sleeping on feather beds. Those are for lords, and even then, they're not exactly living the dream. More on that later. For now, you're stuck with this pokey, itchy, crawly mess, surrounded by the snores of your family and the occasional cluck of a chicken that's decided your bed's a great place to roost. You're not resting. You're enduring, caught in a nightly wrestle with a bed that's more alive than you are. And yet, somehow, medieval folks kept going night after night, proving that survival wasn't about comfort. It was about outlasting the straw, the fleas, and the cold one miserable sleep at a time. You're still shivering in your medieval hut, the straw mat beneath you poking like 1,000 tiny accusations, and the goat in the corner is giving you a look that says, "You're not the only one who hates this. The hearth is your only hope." A flickering pile of embers that's more tease than warmth, and you're already dreading the night ahead. You've managed to survive the morning, but now you're facing the real medieval sleep challenge, keeping the fire alive through the freezing darkness. You're not just sleeping tonight. You're pulling an all-night shift as an amateur fire tender, because letting those embers die out is like inviting winter to tuck you in with an icy blanket. You crouch by the hearth, your breath fogging in the chilly air, and poke at the coals with a stick that looks like it's seen better days. The smoke stings your eyes, but you're grateful for it. It's the only thing keeping the fleas from staging a full invasion. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasant households relied on a central hearth for warmth, cooking, and light, and maintaining it through the night was a communal responsibility, often managed in shifts to ensure it never went out. You're on duty now because your sister, who was supposed to take the early shift, is fake snoring to dodge her turn. You glare at her, but she's buried under a pile of wool and indifference. The fire's your lifeline, and you're not about to let it sputter out, because restarting it in the morning means wrestling with flint and steel in the dark. And you're not that coordinated before breakfast. You add a precious log rationed like gold, and watch the flames flicker, praying they'll last until your brother takes over at some unholy hour. The process isn't glamorous. You're hunched over, coughing through smoke that's turning your lungs into a medieval smokehouse, and the cold's still nipping at your toes. A quirky tidbit: some peasants mastered firebanking, piling ash over embers to keep them smoldering overnight, a trick passed down like a family recipe for not freezing to death. You try it scooping ash with your hands, but you're not sure if you're doing it right or just making a mess. Either way, the embers glow faintly like they're mocking your efforts. You're tempted to crawl back to your straw mat, but the thought of waking up to a dead fire and a hut colder than a tax collector's heart keeps you poking and prodding. Historians still argue whether fire-tending shifts strengthened family cooperation or just fueled grudges, because nothing says "I love you" like waking your sibling at 3 a.m. to deal with a smoky hearth. You're definitely leaning toward grudges right now, as your cousin mumbles something about "just let it burn out" from his corner of the mat pile. You ignore him because you know the stakes. A dead fire means a freezing hut, and in winter, that's not just uncomfortable, it's a one-way ticket to Frostbite City. You're already imagining your toes turning black, and you'd rather not test your luck with medieval medicine, which is mostly prayers and a questionable onion poultice. You take a moment to glance around the hut. Your family's still snoring, the goat's chewing something it shouldn't, and the chickens are having a midnight conference in the rafters. The fire's your only ally, but it's a fickle one, demanding constant attention, like a needy toddler. You add another stick, careful not to waste the wood pile, which is dwindling faster than your patience. The smoke's so thick now, you're half convinced you're curing yourself like a ham. But at least it's keeping the bugs at bay. You're exhausted, your eyes are watering, and your hands are smudged with ash. But you're not done. Someone's got to take the next shift. And you're already plotting how to guilt your brother into it without starting a family feud. The night's a marathon, not a sprint. You'll trade off with others, each of you taking turns, to keep the heart alive, while the rest huddle under blankets that smell like a barn. It's not just about warmth, it's about survival. The fire's the heart of the hut, and if it stops beating, so might you. You're not just tending embers. You're guarding life itself, one smoky, stubborn spark at a time. And as you sit there squinting through the haze, you realize this is what medieval sleep was less about rest and more about fighting the dark, the cold, and the ever-present threat of a world that doesn't care if you wake up. You're not sure if you're winning, but you're still here, and that's something. You're still crouched by the smoky hearth, poking embers like your life depends on it, because it does, while the rest of your medieval hut snores, snuffles, and occasionally clucks in the background. The fire's holding steady barely, but the cold's creeping in through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls, and you're starting to feel like a human popsicle. You're exhausted, itching from that straw mat you escaped earlier, and the goats still giving you side-eye, probably judging your fire-tending skills. But before you can crawl back to your flea-ridden bed, there's one more thing you've got to do. Make sure the night's safe from more than just the cold. In medieval Europe, the dark wasn't just chilly. It was crawling with spirits, demons, and things that go bump in a way that's definitely not just the wind. You're not superstitious, but you're not about to tempt fate either. So you mutter a quick prayer to keep the unseen at bay. A mainstream historical fact, medieval people were deeply religious, and bedtime prayers were a common ritual, often invoking saints or the Virgin Mary to protect against evil spirits believed to lurk at night. You kneel on the dirt floor, the cold biting through your thin tunic, and whisper a plea to Saint Michael, the demon-slaying champ, to guard your hut from anything with claws or a grudge. The words are half mumbled because you're tired, and the smoke's making your head fuzzy, but you're not taking chances. The darkness outside feels alive, and every creak of the roof sounds like a goblin sizing up your soul. You're not alone in this. Your family's muttering their own prayers. And even the pig seems to be grunting along like it's hedging its bets. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval households sprinkled salt or hung garlic near doorways, believing it repelled demons or witches who might sneak in to steal your breath or curse your livestock. You grab a pinch of precious salt, worth more than your weekly bread ration, and toss it near the door just in case. You're not sure if it's working, but it makes you feel slightly less like you're starring in a medieval horror flick. You'd laugh at the absurdity, but the last guy who mocked the local priest's anti-demon advice ended up with a mysteriously sick cow. And you're not about to join him in the Cursed by Association Club. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were driven by genuine fear or just a way to cope with a world full of unexplained dangers. But right now, you're not debating theology. You're just trying to make it to morning without a spectral visitor. You check the doorway, making sure the wooden cross you carved last week is still nailed up. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. You've heard stories, whispers about neighbors who forgot their prayers and woke up to find their milk soured, or their kids screaming about shadow men. You're not sure you buy it, but you're also not risking it. You mutter another quick prayer, this time to Saint Bridget, who's supposed to protect hearts and homes, because your fire's looking a bit wobbly, and you'd rather not wake up to a frozen hut. You glance at your family still piled on that straw mat, like a medieval sleepover gone wrong. Your sisters clutching a small amulet, probably blessed by the village priest, and your cousins muttering something about keeping his shoes, pointed away from the door to confuse any wandering spirits. It's all a bit ridiculous, but in a world where a bad harvest or a sudden fever could end you, a little extra protection feels like a smart bet. You're tempted to roll your eyes, but then the wind howls, shaking the thatch, and you decide maybe one more prayer won't hurt. You're not just fighting the cold tonight, you're fighting the unknown, and every whisper to the saints is like a tiny shield against whatever's lurking in the shadows. The fire crackles a small comfort, and you settle back near the hearth, ready to hand off fire duty to your brother, who's pretending to be asleep to dodge his turn. You give him a nudge, not too gentle, and he grumbles but sits up. You're finally free to crawl back to your straw pile, but not before checking the salt line one more time. The night's long and sleep's not guaranteed, but you've done what you can to keep the demons real or imagined at bay. You pull your grimy blanket tighter, scratch at a new flea bite, and hope your prayers are louder than the wind. In medieval Europe, sleep wasn't just rest. It was a nightly negotiation with the divine, the dark, and a world that never let you rest easy. You're finally back on your straw mat, the hearth's embers glowing faintly, as your brother takes over fire duty, with a scowl that could curdle milk. The goats still chewing something in the corner, and the air smells like smoke sweat, and whatever's growing in your cousin's unwashed cloak. You're itching from fleas, shivering, despite the grimy blanket, and just as you start to drift off, a vivid dream yanks you into a world of bizarre images. Snakes curling around the moon, a talking pig preaching about turnips, or maybe a saint pointing at you like you forgot to pay your tithes. In medieval Europe, dreams weren't just random brain static. They were messages, omens, or divine PowerPoint presentations from the heavens. You wake with a start heart pounding, wondering if that dream about a three-headed goose means you're doomed or just ate too much moldy bread. A mainstream historical fact, medieval people believed dreams were significant, often interpreting them as divine revelations or warnings, with texts like the Oneirocriticon by Artemidorus offering detailed guides to decode their meanings. You're lying there scratching a new flea bite, trying to remember if a goose in a dream means prosperity, or an angry neighbor coming for your chickens. Your family's no help. Your sister's already whispering that her dream about a golden loaf means she'll marry a lord, while your uncle insists his nightmare about a wolf was assigned to skip mass tomorrow. You're not so sure, but you're also not risking it, so you mutter a quick prayer to St. Augustine, who apparently knows a thing or two about dream clarity. A quirky tidbit: some medieval folks believed sleeping with a specific herb like mugwort under their pillow could enhance prophetic dreams or ward off evil ones, though it mostly just made your bed smell like a questionable apothecary shop. You don't have mugwort, but you're tempted to stuff some dried nettles under your head, if only to distract from the straw poking your ribs. You're not sure if it'll help, but at this point you'll try anything to make sense of that goose nightmare. The village-wise woman would probably charge you a week's bread to interpret it, and her last prediction, something about a bountiful harvest, ended with a field of wilted barley, so you're skeptical. Historians still argue whether dream interpretation was a serious spiritual practice or a way to cope with a world full of uncertainty. But right now, you're just hoping your dream doesn't mean the plague's coming. You try to shake it off, but the images linger, and you're half convinced that talking pig was onto something about turnips. You glance at the hearth where your brother's poking the embers with all the enthusiasm of a man sentenced to latrine duty. The hut's still cold, the wind's still whistling through the walls, and you're wondering if you should tell anyone about the dream or keep it to yourself. Confession might get you a lecture from the priest, and you're not in the mood for extra penance. You pull your blanket tighter, ignoring the faint crunch of straw and the tickle of something crawling up your leg. Dreams in this world aren't just entertainment. They're a puzzle you're expected to solve. The church says they could be God's way of nudging you toward righteousness. But the local gossip says they're just as likely a demon trying to trick you into sin. Either way, you're not sleeping well tonight. You try to focus on the fire's faint glow, hoping it'll drown out the dream's weirdness. But your mind's racing. Was that goose a warning? A prophecy? Or just last night's pottage, staging a revolt in your stomach? You'd laugh. But the last time you ignored a dream, your cow stopped giving milk. And you're not about to tempt fate twice. You shift on the mat, dodging a sharp stalk that's practically begging to stab you, and listen to the hut's nightly symphony snores, creaks, and the occasional cluck from a chicken that's decided midnight's the perfect time for a snack. Your family's still dreaming their own cryptic visions, and you're half tempted to wake your sister to ask if she's seen any geese lately. But you don't because you know sleep's a rare commodity here. And you're all in this together, fighting the cold, the dark, and now the mysterious messages of your subconscious. In medieval Europe, dreams weren't just a break from reality. They were a job, another thing to worry about in a world that never let you rest easy. You close your eyes hoping the next dream's less weird, but knowing you'll probably wake up debating turnips again. You're back on your straw mat, still rattled by that bizarre dream about a preaching pig and a three-headed goose. The fleas staging their nightly festival on your skin. The hearth's faint glow is your only comfort, but the cold keeps nipping at your toes like it's got a personal vendetta. You're trying to drift back to sleep, but the medieval world has other plans. The night's alive with noise, and not the soothing kind, like your modern fan's hum. No. This is a chaotic orchestra of howling winds, creaking walls, and livestock that seem to think midnight's the perfect time for a barnyard meeting. The goats chewing something, possibly your last shred of patience, while the pig snorts like it's practicing for the village talent show. Somewhere outside a dog's barking, or maybe it's a wolf and you're not keen to find out which. Sleep in medieval Europe isn't a gentle drift into dreamland. It's a wrestling match with a cacophony that could wake a stone statue. A mainstream historical fact, medieval homes, especially peasant huts, were notoriously noisy at night due to their flimsy construction and the presence of animals making uninterrupted sleep a rare luxury. Your hut's walls are basically sticks and mud, so every gust of wind sounds like it's auditioning for a ghost story. The thatched roof sags and rattles, letting in drafts and the occasional drip of rain that lands right on your face. You pull your grimy blanket tighter, but it's no match for the symphony of chaos. The chickens in the rafters are clucking, like they're plotting a coup, and your cousin's snoring is so loud, you're half convinced he's summoning demons in his sleep. You'd kill for earplugs, but the closest thing here is stuffing your ears with straw, which frankly you're considering, despite the risk of inviting more fleas. A quirky tidbit, some medieval folks believed that certain night noises like a creaking beam or a howling dog were omens of death or bad luck, so they'd burn herbs to cleanse the air and quiet the spirits. You're tempted to try it, grabbing a handful of dried thyme from the corner, but you're not sure if it's for cleansing or just to mask the smell of the pig. You toss it into the hearth anyway, hoping it'll shut up whatever's making that eerie scratching sound outside. It doesn't. Now the hut smells like burnt soup and the noise is louder. Historians still argue whether these night sounds drove people to superstition or if they just learned to tune them out. But right now, you're leaning toward the former. Every creak feels like a warning, and you're half expecting a ghost to pop up and demand rent. You shift on your mat, dodging a sharp stalk that's practically begging to impale you, and try to focus on the fire's crackle, the one semi-soothing sound in this chaos. But then the wind picks up, rattling the door like it's trying to stage a jailbreak, and the dog or wolf outside lets out another howl that sends a shiver down your spine. You're not sure if it's the cold or the thought of whatever's lurking in the dark, but sleep's looking less likely by the minute. Your family's no help, your sister's muttering about her dream of a golden loaf, your uncle's snoring like he saw in a forest, and the goat's now chewing what's definitely your spare sock. You'd laugh, but you're too busy swatting at a fly that's decided your ear's a landing strip. You try closing your eyes, but the noises keep you on edge. The pig's snuffling gets louder like it's narrating its own epic saga, and the chickens are having a full-on debate in the rafters. You're tempted to yell at them, but that'd wake the whole hut, and you're not ready for your brother's lecture about disturbing the peace. Peace. This hut's about as peaceful as a marketplace brawl. You pull the blanket over your head, hoping to muffle the chaos, but it just traps the smell of smoke and unwashed wool. In medieval Europe, sleep wasn't a right, it was a battle against a world that seemed designed to keep you awake. You're not resting. You're surviving one creak snort and howl at a time, praying the dawn comes before you lose your mind or your sock to that goat. You're still sprawled on your straw mat, the medieval night's soundtrack of howling winds, snorting pigs and your uncle's championship snoring, keeping you from anything resembling sleep. The hearth's embers are barely hanging on, and the cold's sneaking in like a thief, making your toes curl under that grimy blanket. You're itching from fleas, haunted by that weird goose dream, and now you're wondering if you'll ever get a moment's rest. But here's the kicker in medieval Europe. Sleep wasn't always one long stretch like you're used to. You're not just fighting noise and bugs tonight. You're waking up in the middle of it all for a weird ritual called biphasic sleep. That's right. You're about to get up, do something, and then go back to bed because apparently the Middle Ages didn't believe in letting you rest for too long. A mainstream historical fact, many medieval Europeans practiced biphasic sleep, splitting their night into two chunks, first sleep and second sleep, with a waking period in between, for chores, prayer, or even socializing. You're jolted awake around midnight, not by a nightmare this time, but because your sister's nudging you to check the fire. You groan, but it's your turn. So you stumble off the mat, dodging the goat, who's now decided your corner's prime real estate. The hut's dark, save for the faint glow of the embers and the air so cold you can see your breath like a ghostly reminder you're still alive. You poke the fire at a stick and try not to curse when the smoke stings your eyes like an angry wasp. This waking period isn't optional. It's just what people do, like hitting pause on sleep to deal with life's endless to-do list. You're not alone in this. Your brother's up muttering prayers to St. Bridget, probably hoping she'll keep the demons you prayed against earlier at bay. Your cousin's checking the door, making sure no stray wolves, or worse, nosy neighbors are sniffing around. A quirky tidbit, some medieval folks use this midnight wake-up for surprisingly mundane tasks like mending clothes or brewing ale, while others saw it as prime time for spiritual reflection, believing the quiet hours were when God listened best. You're tempted to sew up a hole in your tunic, but your fingers are half frozen, and you'd probably stab yourself before you fixed anything. Instead, you settle for stirring the embers and whispering a half-hearted prayer, mostly to keep your sister from glaring at you. Historians still argue whether biphasic sleep was a natural response to long winter nights or a cultural habit shaped by religious schedules, but right now, you're just annoyed you're awake. The hut's a symphony of chaos, chickens clucking, the pig snuffling like it's auditioning for a medieval opera, and the wind rattling the thatch like it's trying to escape. You'd love to crawl back to your straw mat, but tradition says you've got to stay up for a bit, maybe an hour, doing something productive. You consider checking the food stores, but that means stepping outside where the cold's waiting to slap you silly. You opt for huddling by the fire, poking it unnecessarily, and wondering if that talking pig from your dream was trying to tell you to stock up on turnips. You glance at your family, some still asleep, others stirring like they're also caught in this bizarre midnight routine. Your uncle's muttering about his dream of a wolf, and you're half tempted to tell him about your goose. But you don't want to start a dream interpretation debate at 1 a.m. You're exhausted, your eyes are heavy, and the fleas are staging a comeback on your shins. This biphasic sleep thing feels like a cruel prank. Why wake up just to freeze and fuss over a fire? But it's not about comfort, it's about survival. The fire needs tending, the hut needs checking, and maybe, just maybe the gods are listening during these quiet hours. You're not sure you buy it, but you're not risking a demon invasion or a cold snap to find out. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, but is probably just an hour, you crawl back to your mat, dodging a chicken that's decided to roost on your spot. You pull the blanket over your head, ignoring the smell of damp wool and the tickle of something crawling up your arm. You're hoping for a few hours of second sleep before the rooster starts its morning scream fest. In medieval Europe, sleep wasn't a straight shot, it was a broken, choppy journey, interrupted by chores, prayers, and the constant fight to stay warm. You're not resting. You're strategizing one half-asleep shift at a time, praying you'll make it to dawn, without freezing, itching, or dreaming of that goose again. You're finally sinking back into your straw mat, the faint glow of the hearth casting shadows that dance like ghosts across the hut's muddy walls. The midnight fire-tending shift left you bleary-eyed, the smoke still stinging like a grudge. And that goat still chewing something in the corner, probably your last shred of sanity. You're hoping for a few precious hours of that second sleep you stumbled through earlier, but if you thought the chaos of biphasic sleep was weird, brace yourself. If you're a monk in a medieval monastery, sleep isn't just a battle with fleas and cold. It's a tightly scheduled dance with God, where rest comes second to prayer. You're not in your peasant hut anymore. Imagine you've traded your grimy blanket for a coarse woolen habit, your straw pile for a hard wooden bench, and your snoring family for a dormitory of chanting brothers who think sleeping too long is a one-way ticket to sin. A mainstream historical fact, medieval monasteries followed strict schedules called the divine office, with monks waking multiple times a night for prayers, like matins and lauds often starting as early as 2 a.m., severely limiting sleep to just a few hours. You're lying on a narrow bench in a stone-walled dormitory, the cold seeping through your thin mattress, like it's trying to claim your soul. The bell rings, clang clang like it's angry. You even thought about dozing off, and you're up shuffling to the chapel in the pitch dark, your sandals slapping the icy floor. The air smells of damp stone and incense, but there's no warmth, just the flicker of candles and the drone of Latin chants. You're supposed to be praising God, but you're mostly praying your eyelids don't betray you mid-verse. A quirky tidbit: some monasteries enforced a rule of silence at night, called the Great Silence, so monks communicated with hand signals, leading to some hilarious mix-ups, like accidentally asking for bread instead of a blanket in the dark. You try to signal for a candle to light your way back to bed, but you fumble the gesture, and now Brother Gregory thinks you're asking for a second helping of gruel. You're too tired to care, so you just nod and shuffle back to your bench, where sleep's more of a suggestion than a reality. The rule of Saint Benedict, the medieval monk's handbook, insisted on humility and discipline, so your bed is deliberately uncomfortable, no straw, no blankets, just a plank and a prayer to keep you humble. Historians still argue whether monastic sleep deprivation was meant to strengthen spiritual focus or just made monks crankier, but right now, you're leaning toward cranky. You're back on your bench trying to snatch a nap before the next bell at 4 a.m. But the stone walls echo every cough, shuffle, and whispered prayer. You're jealous of your peasant self who at least had a straw mat and a snoring pig for company. Here is just you, the cold, and a nagging sense that God's watching your every yawn. You try to focus on holy thoughts, but your mind's stuck on that goose dream from earlier and you're wondering if it's a sin to dream about poultry. You'd laugh, but the great silence means you'd get a stern look from the abbot, and you're not in the mood for extra penance. You pull your habit tighter, but it's about as warm as a wet rag, and the dormitory's so chilly, you can see your breath like a tiny cloud of guilt for wanting to sleep instead of pray. The other monks are tossing on their benches, some muttering psalms in their sleep, others probably dreaming of warmer cloisters. You're tempted to sneak a bit of straw from the stables to soften your bench, but that's a rule breaker, and you're already on thin ice for accidentally humming during Vespers. Monastic life isn't about comfort. It's about sacrifice, and sleep's just another thing you offer up to God. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the ache in your back, and the bell that's about to ring again, dragging you back to the chapel. In medieval monasteries, sleep was a battle between the body's needs and the soul's demands. You're not resting. You're enduring, caught in a cycle of prayers bells and hard benches that make your peasant hut's straw pile look like a luxury suite. You're counting the minutes until dawn, hoping the next prayer session doesn't involve standing for an hour in the freezing chapel. The goat, the fleas, even that talking pig dream, they're starting to feel like old friends compared to this. You're not sure how monks did this night after night, but you're starting to understand why they looked so serene. It's probably just exhaustion. You drift off dreaming of a softer bed, but the bell's already looming, ready to yank you back to holiness before you can even snore. You're back on your hard monastic bench, the echo of the last prayer bell still ringing in your ears like a divine alarm clock, and your body screaming for a break from this medieval sleep deprivation experiment. You're dreaming of that straw mat back in your peasant hut, fleas and all, because at least it had a bit of give. Here, it's just you, a plank, and a woolen habit that itches like it's woven from pure regret. But let's shift gears. Imagine you're not a monk anymore, but you're not back in your cramped hut either. Now you're a noble, lounging in a castle, thinking you've upgraded to the medieval equivalent of a penthouse suite. Spoiler, it's not as glamorous as you'd hoped. Even lords and ladies didn't escape the misery of medieval sleep, just with fancier bedding and slightly fewer goats. You're in a drafty stone chamber, the walls draped with tapestries that look regal, but do little to stop the cold from seeping in, like an uninvited guest. A mainstream historical fact, medieval nobles often slept in four-poster beds, with feather mattresses and curtains for warmth and privacy, but these beds were still riddled with bugs, and far from comfortable by modern standards. You're lying on a feather bed, which sounds luxurious until you realize its lumpy smells faintly of damp bird, and shifts every time you move like sleeping on a cloud with a grudge. The curtains around your bed are heavy, woven with scenes of heroic battles, but they're not just for show. They're your only defense against the castle's icy drafts. You pull them closed, hoping for a cocoon of warmth, but the air's still chilly enough to make your breath fog. You're a noble, sure, but you're still itching, because even fancy beds came with fleece lice and the occasional adventurous mouse. A quirky tidbit. Some nobles slept with a bedfellow, a trusted servant or friend who shared their bed for warmth and security. A practice that raised eyebrows but was surprisingly common. You glance at your bedfellow, some loyal retainer named Edmund, who smells like old cheese and snores like he's trying to summon a storm. You'd rather be alone, but warmth is warmth and you're not about to kick him out into the cold stone corridor. You adjust your linen nightshirt, which is slightly less scratchy than a peasant's tunic, but still feels like wearing a sack of mildly irritated wool. The castle's quiet, save for the distant howl of wind through arrow slits and the occasional clank of a guard's armor. You'd laugh at the idea of a noble snoring next to a servant, but you're too busy scratching a new bite on your neck. Historians still argue whether noble beds were a true luxury or just a fancier version of peasant misery. But right now, you're leaning toward misery. Your feather bed's better than straw, but it's still a far cry from your modern mattress. And the curtains trap as much dust as they do warmth. You're surrounded by wealth tapestries, carved wooden chests, maybe even a silver candlestick, but it doesn't make sleep any easier. The castle's stone walls radiate cold, and the fire in your chamber's heart is more for show than function, spitting smoke that makes your eyes water. You're tempted to call for more blankets, but the servants are asleep, and you're not about to wander the dark halls in your nightshirt, where you might trip over a sleeping dog or worse, a drunken knight. You shift, trying to find a spot where the feathers aren't poking you like tiny medieval pitchforks. Edmund mutters something about venison in his sleep, and you wonder if he's dreaming of the feast you both attended earlier, where the wine flowed, but the warmth didn't. You're jealous of your peasant self, who at least had a pile of family members to share body heat, even if it came with a side of pig breath. Here, it's just you, Edmund, and a bed that's more status symbol than sanctuary. You pull the curtains tighter, hoping to block out the draft. But a gust sneaks through, reminding you that castles were built for defense, not comfort. In medieval Europe, sleep was a universal struggle. Noble or peasant, you were fighting the same cold bugs and restless nights, just with different props. You close your eyes, praying for a dreamless sleep, but knowing you'll probably wake up to Edmund snoring or another flea claiming your shin. You're still tossing on your lumpy feather bed in the noble's castle, the heavy curtains doing a lousy job of keeping out the chill while your bedfellow Edmund snores like he's trying to summon a dragon. The fleas are having a field day on your shins, and the distant howl of wind through the castle's arrow slits sounds like it's mocking your attempt at sleep. But let's rewind to your peasant roots, because winter's rolling in. And if you thought sleep was tough before, brace yourself. The medieval cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's a full-on assault, turning your hut into an icebox and your straw mat into a frozen torture device. You're back in that muddy one-room hovel, surrounded by your family, the goat and a pig that's starting to look like it's plotting a takeover. The fire's your only ally, but it's a fickle one, and you're piling on every grimy layer you own to keep from turning into a medieval popsicle. A mainstream historical fact: during medieval winters, temperatures in uninsulated homes often dropped below freezing, and peasants layered multiple tunics, cloaks, and even animal hides to trap body heat, as hypothermia and frostbite were real threats. You're wrapped in your one woolen tunic, a cloak that smells like it's been through a barnyard brawl, and a pair of leggings so patched they're practically a quilt. Your feet are bare, sandals are a summer luxury, and you've stuffed rags into your boots to keep your toes from going numb. The air's so cold you can see your breath, a little cloud that reminds you of that goose dream, except now you're wondering if it was a warning about frostbite. You huddle closer to the hearth where your brother's still poking embers, his face smudged with ash like he's auditioning for a chimney sweep. A quirky tidbit: some peasants smeared their skin with animal fat like goose grease, believing it acted as a barrier against the cold, though it mostly made them smell like a medieval kitchen accident. You're tempted to try it, rubbing a bit of leftover fat from last week's stew on your hands. But it just makes you feel like a walking candle and attracts the dog, who's now licking your fingers with unsettling enthusiasm. You swat him away, but he's persistent, probably because he's as cold as you are. Historians still argue whether these makeshift insulation tricks actually worked or just gave people a false sense of security. But right now, you're willing to believe anything that keeps your fingers from turning blue. You pull your cloak tighter, ignoring the itch from the wool that's more lice than fabric. The hut's walls are doing a terrible job against the wind, which sneaks through gaps like it's got a personal invitation. You're tempted to stuff more straw into the cracks, but that means raiding your already flattened bed, and you're not ready to sacrifice what little cushion you have. Your family's piled together on the mat, a snoring heap of shared warmth, but even that's not enough. The cold's relentless, creeping up from the dirt floor, which feels like it's been personally chilled by the devil himself. You're starting to understand why your uncle keeps muttering about moving south, though you're pretty sure he means the next village, not some tropical paradise. You glance at the goat who's somehow unbothered chewing away like it's on vacation. You'd laugh, but your teeth are chattering too hard, and you're focused on not letting the fire die. Your sister's taken over fire duty, poking the embers with a stick while whispering prayers to Saint Bridget, probably hoping for a miracle to keep the hut above freezing. You're not sure if it's the cold or the fear of losing a toe, but sleep's looking like a distant dream. You try to curl up tighter, tucking your hands under your armpits, but the straw's poking you like it's got a personal vendetta. In medieval winters, sleep wasn't about comfort, it was about survival, a nightly battle against frost that demanded every trick from greasy hands to communal cuddles. You close your eyes hoping for a few hours of warmth, but knowing the cold's waiting to pounce the moment the fire falters. You're huddled on your straw mat, the winter chill seeping through your grimy cloak like it's got a personal mission to freeze your soul. The hearth's embers are barely holding on, and your sister's poking them with the enthusiasm of someone who's already dreaming of spring. The goat's still chewing something, probably your last hope for a decent night's sleep, while the wind howls outside, rattling the thatch like it's trying to stage a breakout. You're itching from fleas, shivering, despite your layers, and that bizarre goose dream keeps nagging at you like a bad omen. You'd give anything for a solid 8 hours, but sleep in medieval Europe is as elusive as a clean tunic. Desperate, you're eyeing a clay cup by the hearth, filled with a murky brew your aunt swears will knock you out. In a world without Ambien, medieval folks turn to herbal remedies to chase sleep. But let's be clear, these potions were less sweet dreams and more hope you don't wake up poison. A mainstream historical fact, medieval people used herbal concoctions often made from plants like poppy henbane or chamomile to induce sleep, though these were risky due to inconsistent dosing and potential toxicity. You grab the cup, sniffing the contents, smells like damp earth and regret. Your aunt insists it's a mix of poppy juice and nettle boiled with a splash of ale for flavor. You're not sure if it's a sleep aid or a medieval prank, but you're so tired you're willing to risk it. You take a sip, wincing at the bitter taste, like someone brewed a lawn and forgot to filter it. The brew's supposed to make you drowsy, but right now, it's just making your stomach gurgle like it's staging a revolt. You'd laugh, but you're too busy praying you don't end up like old man Cedric, who drank a sleep potion and spent 3 days hallucinating about talking sheep. A quirky tidbit, some medieval recipes called for adding frog skin or bat wings to sleep brews believed to channel mystical energies, though they mostly just added a side of nausea. You're grateful your aunt skipped the frog skin, but you're still side-eyeing the cup, wondering if that murky fleck is dirt or something worse. You set it down, deciding to stick with exhaustion over whatever's brewing in there. Historians still argue whether these herbal remedies were effective or just placebo, with the added thrill of possible poisoning, but right now you're not feeling sleepy, just queasy. You pull your cloak tighter, trying to ignore the cold creeping up from the dirt floor, which feels like it's been personally iced by winter's wrath. You glance at your family sprawled across the straw mat, like a medieval sleepover gone wrong. Your brothers muttering about his shift at the hearth. Your cousins clutching an amulet, like it's his ticket to dreamland. And the pigs snuffling, like it's narrating its own epic. You're tempted to try another sip of the brew, but the memory of Cedric's sheep hallucinations stops you cold. Instead, you focus on the fire's faint crackle, hoping its rhythm will lull you to sleep. The hut's a mess of noises, whine, snores, and the occasional cluck from a chicken that's decided midnight's prime time for a strut. You'd kill for a white noise machine. But the closest thing here is the pig's rhythmic grunting, which is less soothing and more like a barnyard metronome. You shift, dodging a sharp stalk in the straw that's practically begging to stab you and try to focus on anything but the cold. Your aunt's still swearing by her potion, but you're not buying it last week. She gave you a headache cure that tasted like regret and made you sneeze for hours. In medieval Europe, sleep remedies were a gamble, a mix of hope herbs and a prayer that you'd wake up at all. You're not sure if it's the cold, the fleas, or the thought of that brew, but sleep's slipping further away. You close your eyes, willing yourself to drift off, but the wind's howling, the goats chewing, and that goose dream's creeping back like it's got a score to settle. You're not resting. You're surviving one bitter sip and one stubborn breath at a time, hoping dawn comes before the potion or the cold wins. You're still curled up on your straw mat, the bitter aftertaste of that questionable sleep brew lingering like a bad decision, while the winter wind howls outside, shaking the hut like it's trying to evict you. The hearth's embers are barely clinging to life, and your sister's half-hearted poking isn't helping. The goats chewing something, possibly your last scrap of dignity, and the fleas are treating your skin like a medieval amusement park. You're desperate for sleep, but just as you start to drift, your legs twitch, and suddenly you're standing, stumbling through the dark hut like a drunk ghost. Congratulations, you're sleepwalking, and in a medieval world full of open hearts, sharp tools, and livestock with attitude, this is less a quirky habit and more a high-stakes obstacle course. You're weaving past the pig who grunts like you've offended it, and narrowly avoid tripping into the fire, which would definitely ruin your night. A mainstream historical fact, sleepwalking or somnambulism was known in medieval Europe, often attributed to spiritual possession or an imbalance of bodily humors, and posed real dangers in cramped, hazard-filled homes. You're lurching toward the door, your family snoring, through the chaos oblivious to your midnight adventure. The dirt floor's cold under your bare feet, and you're half-conscious, guided by some dreamlike urge. Maybe that talking goose from earlier is leading you to a turnip treasure. You bump into a wooden stool, sending it clattering, and your brother stirs, muttering, "Not again, like this is your third sleepwalk this week." You'd laugh if you weren't busy dodging a chicken that's decided your path is its new roost. A quirky tidbit, some medieval folks believed sleepwalking was caused by moonlight sneaking through cracks in the walls, so they'd hang thick cloths over windows to block lunar influence. Though it mostly just trapped more dust, you're vaguely aware of the moonlight filtering through the thatch, casting eerie shadows that make the hut look like a haunted maze. You're not sure if it's the moon or that dodgy brew, but you're stumbling toward the door where the cold's waiting to slap you awake. Historians still argue whether sleepwalking was seen as a medical issue or a sign of demonic interference. But right now, you're just praying you don't step on the goat who's eyeing you like it's ready to headbutt you back to bed. You fumble past a water bucket, splashing your foot with icy water that jolts you half awake. The hut's a minefield spilled grain stray tools, and a pig that's now snuffling your ankle like it's auditioning for a guard dog role. You're tempted to lie down right there, but the floor's a muddy mess, and you'd rather not wake up with a chicken nesting in your hair. Your family's no help. Your sister's snoring. Your cousin's clutching his amulet like it'll save him from your clumsiness. And your uncle's muttering about wolves again. You're not sure if you're dreaming or just delirious, but the goose from your dream is back waddling ahead like it's got a map to Narnia. You'd laugh, but you're too busy avoiding a pitchfork leaning against the wall. You reach the door, the cold air hitting you like a bucket of medieval reality. Outside, the village is silent save for the distant howl of a dog or maybe a wolf, which isn't comforting. You're shivering your tunic, no match for the frost, and you're starting to wonder if sleepwalking's a curse. Or just your body's way of saying, "This hut's too crowded." You turn back, stumbling over the same stool, and your brother finally wakes up, grabbing your arm, before you faceplant into the hearth. He's grumbling, but he guides you back to the mat, where the straw's still poking like it's got a personal vendetta. In medieval Europe, sleepwalking wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous, a nightly gamble with fire animals and a world that didn't care if you tripped. You settle back under your blanket, itching and freezing, hoping you stay put until dawn, because you're not sure you can survive another midnight stroll with that goose. You're back on your straw mat heart, still racing from your sleepwalking stumble. Through the hut, the cold air clinging to your skin like a damp curse. The goats still chewing in the corner, eyeing you like you're the one who's lost it, while the pigs snuffling adds a bassline to your family's snoring symphony. The hearth's embers are barely alive, and your brother's half asleep muttering about your midnight wanderings isn't helping. You're itching from fleas, shivering under your grimy blanket. And just when you think you might finally drift off, a distant bell tolls slow, heavy, like it's announcing the end of the world. It's not just any bell. It's the death knell ringing for someone who didn't make it through the night. In medieval Europe, the plague's shadow looms over every sleep, turning your straw pile into a battlefield where fear keeps you awake. As much as the cold or that goose dream you can't shake. A mainstream historical fact, during the Black Death in the 14th century, church bells often rang at night to signal deaths, disrupting sleep and heightening fears of disease in already anxious communities. You lie there eyes wide, listening to the bell's mournful clang, each note, a reminder that the plague could be creeping closer. The village has been hit hard. Half the neighbors are gone, and the survivors whisper about cursed air or God's wrath. You're not sure if it's the fleas on your mat or the bell's echo, but sleep feels like a luxury you can't afford. You pull your blanket tighter, ignoring the itch, and the faint smell of mold, and pray you're not next. The thought of that talking pig from your dream feels trivial now, plagues the real nightmare. A quirky tidbit: some medieval folks slept with garlic or onions under their pillows, believing the smell could ward off plague-carrying miasmas, though it mostly just made their beds smell like a questionable stew. You're tempted to try it, but the only garlic in the hut's been claimed by your aunt, who's convinced it'll keep her safe from both disease and demons. You settle for clutching a small wooden cross, hoping it's enough to keep the plague at bay. The bell tolls again, and you flinch, wondering if it's for old man Cedric who was coughing last week, or maybe widow Agnes who stopped coming to market. Historians still argue whether these nighttime bells heightened community solidarity or just fueled panic. But right now, you're firmly in the panic camp. The hut's dark, save for the hearth's faint glow, and the air feels heavier, like it's carrying the weight of everyone's fears. Your sister stirs, muttering a prayer to St. Roch, the plague saint, and you join in, whispering under your breath. The pigs snuffling, the chickens are rustling, and the wind's howling like it's auditioning for a ghost story. But none of it drowns out that bell. You're tempted to wake your brother, ask if he heard who died, but he's finally asleep, and you don't want to start a midnight plague debate. You're already imagining symptoms: a tickle in your throat, a twinge in your side, And you're not sure if it's real or just your mind playing tricks. You'd laugh at your paranoia, but the bell's still ringing and humor feels like a distant memory. You shift on the mat, dodging a sharp stalk that's practically begging to stab you, and try to focus on the fire's crackle, hoping it'll lull you back to sleep. But the bell's echo lingers, and you're haunted by stories of whole families found dead by morning, their doors marked with crosses to warn others. Sleep's not just a struggle now. It's a gamble, a nightly dance with fear that the plague might slip through the cracks in your hut's walls. You close your eyes clutching that cross and pray for dawn, for warmth, for one more day without that bell ringing for you. In medieval Europe, sleep wasn't just about surviving the cold or the fleas. It was about outlasting the terror that came with every toll, every shadow, every breath you weren't sure you'd take again. You're still lying on your straw mat, the tolling of that death knell fading into the night, leaving your heart pounding like it's trying to outrun the plague itself. The hut's a mess of shadows, the heart's embers barely holding back the cold, and the goats chewing in the corner feels like a grim metronome counting down to dawn. You're itching from fleas, shivering under your grimy blanket, and haunted by that goose dream. The plague bell and the memory of your sleepwalking stumble into a bucket. Sleep in medieval Europe wasn't just a struggle against cold and bugs, it was a testament to human resilience. A nightly act of defiance against a world that seemed determined to keep you awake or worse. As you lie there, you can't help but marvel at the stubborn ingenuity of those who survived these nights, their gritty hacks, shaping a legacy that makes your modern bed feel like a miracle. A mainstream historical fact, medieval peasants developed ingenious survival strategies like communal sleeping and fire banking to endure harsh winters and sleepless nights, ensuring their family's survival despite brutal conditions. You think back to the ways you fought through this night huddling with your family. For warmth, tending the fire in shifts, whispering prayers to fend off demons, and even sipping that questionable herbal brew that tasted like regret. Each trick from piling on greasy layers to stuffing straw in wall gaps was a small victory, a way to outsmart the cold, the dark, and the fear of plague. You're still here breathing despite the fleas, the wind, and that pig's relentless snuffling, which is more than you can say for old man Cedric, whose cough you haven't heard since that bell rang. A quirky tidbit: some peasants believed sleeping with their heads pointed north aligned them with the earth's energies, supposedly guaranteeing better rest, though it mostly just meant waking up with a crick in your neck. You're tempted to try it, shifting your head toward what you think is north, but the straw's so pokey it's like sleeping on a porcupine and you give up. You're not sure if it's the cold or the thought of aligning with cosmic forces, but you're too tired to care. Historians still argue whether these sleep habits were practical adaptations or steeped in superstition, but right now, you're just grateful for the warmth of your family's snores and the faint crackle of the hearth, keeping you anchored in this relentless night. You glance at the hut, where your sister's still muttering prayers to Saint Roch, your cousin's clutching his amulet like it's a lifeline, and the goats finally stop chewing, maybe out of respect for your exhaustion. You'd laugh at the absurdity of it all, surviving demons, plague bells, and a sleepwalking goat chase. But you're too worn out. Instead, you pull your blanket closer, ignoring the itch and the faint whiff of mold, and let your mind wander to the legacy of these medieval sleepers. They didn't have your soft mattress or heated blanket, but they had grit, stubbornness, and a knack for turning straw ash and prayers into survival tools. Their nights were a battle, yet they kept going, passing down a resilience that's woven into the comfort you take for granted now. As the heart's glow softens, the shadows stretch longer, and the wind's howl fades to a gentle murmur, you feel the weight of the night easing. The cold's still there, the fleas haven't signed a truce, But there's a quiet strength in knowing you're part of a lineage that outlasted these brutal nights. Your eyes grow heavy, the straw mat less pokey. The snores of your family a soothing rhythm. You're not just surviving, you're carrying forward a legacy of endurance. One restless night at a time. The medieval world was harsh, but its people were tougher. And as you drift towards sleep, you're grateful for their stubborn hearts, warming your modern bed with whispers of their victories. Let the fire flicker. Let the dawn come slow. Let the goose dream fade. You're here, and that's enough. You're sinking deeper into your straw mat. Now the heart's faint glow, wrapping the hut in a soft amber haze, like a candle burning low. The wind's howl has softened to a sigh, the goats chewing, slowed to a quiet rhythm, and even the fleas seem to have called it a night. Your family's snores blend into a gentle hum, a reminder that you're not alone in this medieval struggle. The cold's still there nibbling at your toes, but it's less fierce, as if the dawn's whispering promises of warmth. You let go of the plague bells echo the goose dream's nonsense, the itch of wool and straw. These nights were brutal, but they carved a path to your modern comfort. Each restless sleeper a quiet hero who kept the fire alive. Your eyelids droop heavy with the weight of their legacy, and the hut feels softer, safer. A cocoon of survival spun from grit and hope. You're drifting now, carried by the rhythm of their endurance, into a sleep that's gentle, deep, and yours. The world outside can wait rest, now, wrapped in the warmth of centuries, safe in the glow of their stubborn light.